myself off the floor.
Welcome to Difficult Conversations About Beauty. My name is Anita East, and I'm a nurse practitioner specialising in aesthetic, skin, and integrative medicine. I'm so delighted to have you here. But can I get you to do me a favour and just look around you out there? It can be super confusing trying to work out what's true and what's not in this world of beauty and health. So during each episode, we seek to dispel the myths, find the truth, and empower one another with ready-to-implement advice that will make your life so much better than before you started listening. Just as a reminder, the podcast is not intended as a substitute for the medical advice of legitimate healthcare practitioners. The listener should regularly consult a healthcare practitioner in matters relating to their health, particularly with respect to any symptoms that may require diagnosis or medical attention. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy. Oh my gosh, Dan, it is so good to see you. I am so excited about this. We have been friends for years, and I have you on my little podcast, Difficult Conversations About Beauty. Yay!
I'm excited.
Yeah, me
Thanks
too.
for inviting me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Dan, can I get you to tell our listeners about you?
So now I am an integrated health coach. And what that means is I work with people from where they're at, taking on board movement capacity, strength, conditioning, history of injury. That led me down a path of gut health and looking into blood work and understanding people's problems with their guts and how that's sort of affecting them, and also incorporating elements of mood, which brings in elements of history of trauma and beliefs. That affects movement, that affects back pain, that affects the entire body, because the entire body is a system. We can't isolate any one particular thing. So my journey has led me here. How it led me here has been kind of a lifelong experience. I had health difficulties when I was a child, almost died from asthma when I was 6. During my childhood or, into teenage years, my father passed away from cancer when I was 15. So understanding the health impacts. And before that, he had had a heart attack, a burst appendix, a transischemic attack, which is like a mini stroke, in the kind of the 5 years before being diagnosed with cancer. So that was kind of a health journey for him. And so I witnessed that in between the ages of sort of 10 and 15. And then later on, obviously, I brought in a whole bunch of my own coping mechanisms around that and a few other experiences in life. And mental illness, depression, anxiety. I was diagnosed with depression for a very long time. I ended up joining the army. So I met a lot of guys with a whole bunch of mental difficulties around that, PTSD and other traumas. And with that came obviously injuries as well. Obviously being in the army military, you're very active, you're running in boots a lot, you're carrying heavy loads, and, pretty much everyone sort of sustains some sort of injury. So I took on board the biomechanics aspect of it. I started to learn about my own movement patterns and how they were contributing to my injuries and obviously the guys I was working with. And then that led me down the path of dealing with my own traumas and depression. And I got in touch with my spiritual aspect through that journey. Once I left the army, I got in touch with a colleague of mine in the fitness industry while I was working in a physio studio in Sydney. So I was working with end of rehab clients as their strength and conditioning coach, going from injury to health. And then one of my colleagues suggested that I do Vipassana meditation. So I did a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, and that brought up a lot of awareness just about myself and my traits and the behaviors and the beliefs that I'd sustained along the way. And with that, I started to delve deeper into my own psyche and my own psychology and where all these beliefs had come from and, my limiting factors, and just trying to understand myself and how that was showing up for me. And then obviously understanding my clients in the same capacity, because, it may not just be pain, it could be a history of trauma or a history of gut health contributing to trauma or vice versa. So that kind of led me down the path of just a little bit of functional aspect of functional medicine, but also integrated health, and just trying to meet the person where they're at and understanding their predicament and how I can help them best.
That's what's fascinating about all of that. I mean, all of it is fascinating, but the fact that you've come from your inciting incidents sounds like there was many of them. There was a few, and then as with all good stories, it came to a head, and you basically got to a point, I don't know what that point was, but something big happened whereby you had the choice of either you go this way down this path, or you go this way down this path. And for whatever reason, you chose a different path to the way that you'd been going. And whether or not it was your 10-day meditation retreat, which sounds incredible, that kind of brought everything into focus for you and made the things that you needed to do much louder in your head, so you couldn't but follow those.
I think there's a few of those that happen across people's lifetimes.
Mm.
You know, and everybody's different. Everybody's going to have their own journey, but I think everyone will face a point in time where it really becomes this fork in the road.
Yeah.
I can remember certain significant events, and I will call them just significant events, that create this, this fork in the road where we decide to lead our lives. And it's those deciding factors which really shape us as a person. Now, sometimes those predicaments are forced upon us,
Mm.
and sometimes we have this sort of character building sort of egoic confrontation where we really have to decide where we're going to head. So in a really simple example, I was 23 at the time. I had just broken up with my long-term girlfriend at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that situation was, we were deciding what our life path was going to be. And she wanted to get married and have kids and all that sort of stuff. And I was at a point in my life where I wasn't ready to make that commitment. So we decided to part ways. And so from there, I had to make the decision, well, what am I going to do here? I just completed my personal training qualifications. This was 2009. Do I start a business as a personal trainer, just teaching people how to lift heavy things and put them back down? Or do I do what I wanted to do ever since I was a young child and join the army and contribute to something bigger than myself, and had these aspirations and dreams of serving the community and saving the world? So it was that decision there where I obviously called up 13-1901 and decided to join the Defence Force. But that obviously put me on a path down a track that is, obviously led me here. And I think there are some big deciding moments in life for everybody where they can have those moments where they decide where they're going to go. But understanding that a lot of these things are little choices along the way as well that aren't necessarily massive for them. They might not stand out, but everything leads us to where we're going to go.
Yeah, it's almost like 1 degree to the right, 1 degree to the right, 1 degree to the right makes a massive difference in the trajectory of your life at the end, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And you
this
kind
is
of,
what I find with my clients.
sorry, Dol, you go.
Well, this is what I find with my clients a lot of the time. It's the little behaviors, it's the little beliefs, it's the little rituals that build up for people that last for 20, 30, 40 years, that all of a sudden, because the body's resilient and we've been able to cope along the way, these things build up over time and it gets to a breaking point. And all of a sudden, after, like I said, 20, 30, 40 years, all of a sudden we're experiencing pain. But the pain is never the problem. We delve deeper into what are the patterns, whether it be movement patterns, beliefs, behaviors, sometimes they're breathing mechanics, these things that affect our body over years and years and years that we never really notice until it's almost too late.
So now you work in the form of an integrative health coach. Is that how you describe yourself? Is that, like, if we were to put you in a nutshell, is that what it is?
Yes. So my background is obviously personal training, strength conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've decided to work in that physiotherapy studio and learn everything I could about biomechanics and injury mechanics and how that all works and how people really heal from injuries. And coming through that path, I did a few courses and started to understand that rehab in terms of injury and strength and conditioning are not two separate things. There's a spectrum here. And all it is understanding your entry point, where you're at now, and
Mm.
how do we give you the next logical step to what you want to achieve.
Mm.
Whether that be better movement patterns, whether that be better posture, some sort of performance metric, whatever it is. But sometimes the things holding you back might be your nutrition patterns. So what you're eating might not be conducive to those goals. So then we
Mm.
start to have to take that into account, because you're not just what you eat, you're also what you absorb. So then we have to start to understand the intricacies of gut health
Mm.
and the intricacies of how your organs are functioning in order to elucidate some of these performance metrics you want to achieve. But again, the other aspect to that is the mindset. So are you
Mm.
sleeping effectively? Is your
Mm.
sleep hygiene okay? Do you have rituals throughout your day where you're starting to respect yourself and revere yourself and committing little acts of benevolence to yourself in order
Mm.
to support some of these performance metrics that you say you want to achieve? And I
Mm.
think working with people, all of these aspects have to come into account, and we can't just isolate one tiny.
Mm. So we can't just be, we can't be someone who says, I want to be fitter, but I don't want to change my mindset about me putting myself down or me thinking I'm not good enough or something like
Mm.
that. It's a case of basically you're almost getting a contract from people that, and it might only be something simple in terms of if you could break it down into, I will be better to myself. I will treat myself better. And that encompasses the way we think about ourselves, the world, and other people, the way what we eat, how we eat, what we do with our bodies, i.e. movement,
Mm.
how we breathe, everything. It encompasses everything just in terms of that contract that we take out with ourselves saying, I'm enough. I deserve this. I am worthy of feeling good and being the best version of myself that I can possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to that first conversation we have with people.
Yeah.
I want to get fitter. I want to get stronger. I want
Yeah.
to achieve this. Why?
Yeah.
Why is that important to you?
Mm. Mm.
What does that help you to achieve? I want to lift 100 kilos. Okay, but why? I mean, I can take you there,
Mm. Mm.
but why?
Mm.
And then what does that mean about you? Why haven't you done that already?
Mm.
Lifting 100 kilos for most people is going to be relatively easy if you just commit to the program.
Mm.
There's a reason you're not committing to the program. There's a reason you haven't prioritized this. And maybe you've said you want to achieve this thing,
Mm.
all your behaviors and your values, as in how you act throughout your day, don't line up to achieving this thing.
Mm.
So now
Mm.
you've put a goal in place
Yeah.
based on the expectations of other people, what society expects you to achieve.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's not going to be a true goal that aligns with you and your beliefs and your behaviors. So we need to align your goals with your values. And then we need to start to understand why you haven't already achieved that goal, what's holding you back, so that we can understand why these behaviors have been getting in your way. So you might say you want to lose 15 kilos, for example. Well, anyone with an understanding of human movement and nutrition says, cool, we're going to move a little bit more, we're going to eat a little bit less, we're going to eat some more of the right foods.
Yep.
There might be some underlying factors there that we need to consider, but generally that's the most part. But there's a reason why you haven't been eating the correct foods for you,
Mm.
because you've got these beliefs around food for some reason,
Yes.
or you've got this approach around food that is stopping you from committing to the consistency required to achieve the goal that you said you wanted to achieve.
Mm. Absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because would you say that your typical client, so you work not only in face-to-face kind of environments in a gym setting or a healthcare kind of setting, you also work, you do online programming and online coaching too, don't you? So what
Yes.
would be your first kind of when you meet someone, and what's your typical client?
I
Or is
work
there
with
a
some
typical
people.
client?
My typical client is a very complex person.
Mm. Mm.
When someone comes to me, they've generally tried everything, in their words,
Right.
and they've got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
There's some sort of history of pain, history of injury. There's a reason why they haven't been able to achieve those things, or there is maybe they've seen professionals, they've seen physiotherapists, they've seen general practitioners, and they're still not able to stop the pain from reoccurring. So quite often this might come back to musculoskeletal stuff. So, shoulder impingements, lower back pain, knee problems. And that's kind of the point of entry for most people. I've got a history of injury and I want to get stronger, but I know I need to take care of this area. So we need to start talking, and just to use the shoulder as an example, because this is how deep we can dive with shoulder mechanics. I have an impingement in my shoulder, which all you're really telling me is that you've got pain when the shoulder's in a certain position. Okay. So we start to understand the mechanics of what we call the glenohumeral joint, which is the shoulder joint itself, where the arm attaches to the rest of the body. But that attaches onto the scapula or the shoulder blade. So we need to start to understand, why isn't the shoulder blade moving correctly as well? Because the arm and the shoulder blade need to move together. So if the shoulder blade is restricted in its movement, then the arm does too much work, and then that joint at the shoulder gets overloaded and becomes painful. But then if that shoulder blade isn't moving effectively, maybe we need to look deeper into the thoracic spine and into the breath mechanics. Because someone who has come to me might have been an office worker, or they've been sitting down for 20, 25 years, and their breath mechanics are out. So they've been using their ribs and their stabilizers and the muscles around their upper body to try and lift the ribs as best as possible to try and get oxygen in, because that's their only strategy. Because when you're sitting down in a chair, especially for 8 or 9 hours a day, your pelvic floor is inhibited. Which means your diaphragm can't push down effectively. Which means your rib cage has to do something in order to try and get oxygen in. So it has to lift. Now, if you're breathing like that 20,000 times a day, you're probably going to get really good at using those muscles incorrectly.
That's right.
So we're just a bunch of habits. Just a bunch of movements that are repetitive throughout the day. So once we start to understand those, we can start to dive deeper. But those muscles that lift the rib cage, they're there for a reason. They should help lift the ribs and expand the rib cage more, especially when we're breathing anxiously, when we need to get that extra oxygen in. So now I've got an anxious breath pattern, which means I'm breathing into a sympathetic or a fight and flight mode. So now if I'm in a fight and flight mode for 20,000 breaths a day and I'm not achieving that opposite parasympathetic rest and digest state, well, then my digestive system is under attack. It can't operate effectively. If my diaphragm isn't massaging my organs, well, then I'm not able to move lymph fluid around my body, which means my immune system is going to be affected. All right. So the stagnation that we get in the body from sitting down too much leads to all sorts of problems. So maybe it's not just a shoulder impingement. Maybe it's just a general movement issue that we need to take care of.
Absolutely. And so you would look at someone. So you'd obviously, because, sometimes you go to a gym and, you can say to the person working behind the counter at the gym, I'd like to get a program done. And they go, yeah, cool. So do 5 reps or 10 reps 3 times on this machine, go onto that machine, do this, do that, do the other. That should take you about 35 minutes, and then warm down on the, on the bike or the treadie kind of thing. And that's it. See you later. And then that person, so Jane, then stops going to the gym because her shoulder, which is a bit sore, because she said to, John, who's behind the counter, I can't do this kind of thing above my head because it hurts when I lift. I can't raise my arm above my head because it hurts when I do that. Oh, that's all right. We'll just stick with stuff that you can do this way, chest presses and not chest press, chest pulls. What are they called?
Rows and chest pulls. Chest presses and flies. And
and there's other things we can do. We don't have to worry about that.
Horizontal stuff rather than the vertical stuff.
Exactly. That's right. And
we avoid pain.
That's right. So, we just go, we'll do things that don't cause you pain rather than, and then Jane obviously stops going because her pain's getting worse because she's probably compensating with a left hip at this stage, and her left calf is getting involved in trying to rebalance her and so forth. And she stops going to the gym. So what you do is you assess someone from the absolute root in terms of who they are, what they do, what they've been doing, how they breathe, their mindset, their nutrition, flipping well everything. So a bit of history. I met Dan at a gym, and basically straight away we just kind of connected in terms of his brain is something that I just literally want to wire into mine so that I know all the stuff that Dan knows. In fact, I know quite a lot of people who want that same wire. They want a piece of that wire. They were like, please, can I know as much of the stuff that Dan knows? And you help people. I've got one really good friend who you helped me in terms of my knee. I've got a knee injury from basically biomechanics, from picking up my daughter when she was a baby in the wrong way, in terms of, a long-term history of being a ballet dancer and a runner and so forth. And then I picked her up in the wrong way on this particular occasion, and my knee, I did a double flap tear of my left meniscus. So it was gone. So I've now got arthritis in that knee because there's no meniscus in there anymore. But you looked at me and you were like, okay, this is what we need to do. And you changed, you gave me ideas in terms of how I think about what I'm doing every single day, in terms of every single movement I do.
Yeah.
And that's what you do. You helped a really good friend of mine's son, who is he an Australian weightlifter? And he had an injury, and you helped, and he had to stop lifting, and then you helped him, and now he's, like an absolute champion at what he does.
Well, he had scoliosis from birth.
Right.
Fairly intense scoliosis. So, I was at a point in time where I was just, and this is my specialty, I just keep asking why.
Yeah, you do. You're so curious.
It was the bane of my parents' existence when I was a child.
I can imagine.
But that curiosity has driven me down the path of just understanding all the factors that contribute to a person's existence. If someone's in pain, why? Why is that there? What's contributing to this? How can we do something about it to change how you're moving, how you're living, to remove that pain? Now, that's kind of the same aspect that Western medical science takes, and it's there for a very good reason. But I want to get deeper, rather than just masking the pain and treating it effectively and just saying, hey, look, the pain's gone. I want to understand what brought that pain in from the root cause, deeper and deeper and deeper. Because if we can understand the depth of it, then we can start to reverse it. So with this particular person you're talking about, he was born, and then obviously as he was developed scoliosis, which is a rotational condition of the spine. Now, it looks like he might have a C or an S curve, but when you start to understand the biomechanics of it, it's actually a rotational thing where the spine develops in a vortex. If you think of a double helix of like a DNA type picture, that will be the spine as it twists up. So we can use muscles, we can use movement, we can use breath mechanics to try and limit the amount of rotation that's going one way and bring rotation back to the opposite side. And that's how I helped him rebalance his spine as best as we could. So now, like you said, he is a really well-performing powerlifter and able to lift a few hundred kilos.
Wow, that's amazing. And I suppose with changing the way you feel about your body, because we are capable of incredible things. And when you help someone identify, A, it's not your fault, B, it's something that we can work with, the way they think about themselves and their body must be so enlightening to see. That little moment of self-love, of going, oh, I'm okay, I'm actually okay. And then that leads to, when we believe in ourselves, then we do more things to champion ourselves. We eat better, we think better, we be with people who make us feel better. And so our neurotransmitters and everything and that must be a beautiful thing to see in your clients.
Absolutely. Like, that has been the contributing factor to my staying in the industry, because it can be a challenging industry, especially during COVID. We had the lockdowns and the entire industry was shut down for 3 months. Queensland, luckily, was one of the first ones back into the game. But, there are times where it becomes really challenging to, decide whether you're going to stay in the industry or, there's an easier option. I was, when I grew up, I got my trade as a diesel mechanic. So that was my first job out of school. I went and got my trade, and I know that I could just go spin spanners in the mines and earn, $180,000 a year
Yeah.
and not have anything to think about when I got home,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because of the success stories that I have with clients and the work that I have seen people do and what that has allowed them to achieve for me is the most inspiring thing in the world. I remember one of my first clients down in Sydney in the physio studio. He was surfing all his life, loved surfing. He had to give up the surfing because of back pain.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave up the surfing and he took up stand-up paddleboarding. Now, this person he owns his own business as a bookkeeper. He's an accountant. So you can imagine the long hours spent behind a desk. And we were working together for well over a year. But at the time that this happened, we were probably only working together for about 14 to 16 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't too long. But he got really excited. So, sorry, just to add to that, when he took up stand-up paddleboarding, the reason he was in the physio studio to begin with, he was getting physiotherapy on his shoulder because with the stand-up paddleboarding and the position of his shoulder, that was causing him grief as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's when we started. So fast forward 14, 16 weeks. He comes in one Monday morning, really excited. I was like, what's going on? What's got you all happy? And he couldn't thank me enough because he was able to not just get off the stand-up paddleboard, he was able to surf again and
Wow.
teach his kids to surf that
Oh,
weekend,
wow.
who were at the time, I think, 8 and 10 years of age. And that was one of those moments where I knew that this is the industry I want to be in. And if I can learn some things about biomechanics and health and physiology, and I can help people do that and they're willing to turn up and work and get those results, that's the inspiration that I need.
Because they're living better. They're living well, aren't they? And that
And
makes such
think
a
about the
difference.
relationships that they can build with their family and the
Oh, yeah.
connections that come from that because they're no longer living in pain. So they're not projecting that onto other people and they're not feeling like they're a victim of anything anymore. They're really gaining just their life back.
Mm, mm,
They're gaining freedom to
mm,
move
mm,
and live well and
mm.
gaining that freedom to really connect with people and especially the people that are important to them on a deeper level. I think it's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
And that's what life, essentially, that's what it's about. It's not what you achieve. Yeah, sure, it's your legacy and so on and so forth. But, they've done studies whereby they speak to people who are palliative and who are on their deathbed and they say, what do you wish you'd done more of? And their answer is always that I spent more time with the people that I loved, that I did more things with the people that I loved, that I told them more about how much I loved them. It's those relationships are what give us joy. And I think that segues really nicely into things like neurotransmitters, because that's how we can healthily
Mm.
get things like dopamine, which is our reward kind of pleasure neurotransmitter. And you and I have talks about dopamine that could basically last a week long. But can you tell, because I love the way that you talk about dopamine or the molecule of more, can
I
you
love
talk
it.
to it? Yeah, it's a great book. And after you told me about it, I went and got it.
So the introduction to this book, The Molecule, well, I
Yeah.
can't remember who wrote it, but the introduction to this book is basically,
Lieberman and Long, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
So look down. Everything that's within your arm's reach, right in front of you, is based in serotonin. It's the here and now. So serotonin is the molecule of now. We don't spend much time here. When you look up and you see something that's out of reach, you need some sort of motivation to go and get that thing. So you expect that going to get that thing is going to be better for you somehow. So to put it really simply, you might get a signal from your body that you're thirsty. So your motivation is that you need to go get a drink. Dopamine is the thing that does that for you. It provides the motivation, expecting that whatever's out of arm's reach is going to be better. So I'm going to motivate you to go do that thing, whatever that is. So that's kind of dopamine in a nutshell. It's that molecule of more, it's that molecule of motivation. It's not necessarily the happy chemical that we expect it to be. It's I expect the result to be better than where I am now. And this is the basis of all motivation. It's the avoidance of discomfort, because right now, somehow I can find discomfort in my body. Maybe there's a ache, a niggle, a pain. Maybe I've been sitting on one side of my hip for too long. So I have this motivation to move and change. And that's all based in this dopamine. The problem with this is that we get a lot of dopamine all the time, especially in today's society.
Yes.
We are a quick access society. So we fulfill ourselves. And if you think of society like a poker machine, the reason poker machines work so well is because we hit the button, we expect to win, and then we don't. So then we get this surge of dopamine to motivate us to do more and do more. And now society has gone that way with phones, with TVs, with Netflix, with Uber Eats, with all these expectations of immediate reward.
Social media likes.
Absolutely.
And so what's happening, therefore, to our regulatory system in terms of dopamine? I mean, the fact that we are such a society that expects instant gratification all the time. Now, if we're not getting, or we're getting it from such a bad, unhealthy way, what's happening to our ability to regulate and produce dopamine?
I liken it to any other drug.
Yeah.
Because the way the body works is we have receptors to neurochemicals. So the reason cannabis works is because we have receptors that will accept cannabinoid-like structures and molecules, being endocannabinoids. So if we have a receptor to it, we're going to receive it. And that's going to create some sort of psychological effect for us. But if we have too much, well, then those receptors are flooded, and then we need more and more and more. So like any other drug, if we have too much of it for too prolonged a time, we'll become desensitized, and then we need to fulfill that. So we start to become addicted neurochemically to these reward patterns or these expectations of reward. So then our expectations of immediate gratification get shorter and shorter and shorter. So thinking of it, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, no one just woke up and looked at their phone. Right? They'd wake up and they'd have their morning routine, and they might go get breakfast, and then they might get to the office, and then they check their emails.
Yes.
But these days we're so connected that we wake up and in the middle of the night, I can't sleep, so I'm going to jump on my phone. And all of a sudden I've got this blue light straight in my eyes. As soon as I get light in my eyes, that downregulates the melatonin that has kept me asleep. Cortisol starts to pick up, dopamine starts to pick up, and I start to do the waking cycle of the body at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So then that whole circadian rhythm and the sensitivity to the other neurochemicals becomes disrupted.
Unbelievable. That's frightening, isn't it? That's super frightening, because it's almost like we are wired to be on all the time. And then once you get like you said, with the dopamine, and then you get the cortisol and the adrenaline, and once those kick in, if it's nighttime, I don't know about other people, but if it's nighttime and my brain switches on, that 2 a.m. thought dump is never, you're going to have the best day. You're going to have everything's amazing. It's always like the demon's talking to me at 2 a.m. It's right. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Who do you think you are? This is going to go wrong. That's going to go wrong. And it's always at 2 a.m. And it's because of that, you've overstimulated that dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, like you said, deregulation of the melatonin process. What are some great ways that we can help ourselves in terms of getting good dopamine, regulating our dopamine, reducing the activity that heightens our dopamine in a harmful way?
First, I would suggest behavioral practices, because like I said, we are just a culmination of habits.
Yeah.
Our entire body works neurologically. So even the muscles are stupid. They just do as they're told. And I like to liken it to
Mine don't.
If muscles are in a position to work and they've got the neurological input to work, they'll work.
Yeah.
You're like, I've got weak glutes. Mate, you've been sitting down all day. You haven't put them in a position to work, and you haven't needed them. So your brain's forgotten about those areas. It hasn't reinforced the highway neurological highway to those muscles, but you've been using other muscles. So in the same way, we're a culmination of these habits and rituals throughout the day. So if we start to understand what these rituals are, what these routines are, and what these behaviors are, we can start to take care of them. And then the other aspect is giving ourselves the tools and resources in order to balance things out.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a nutritional aspect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of behaviors, obviously minimizing phone time as much as possible, limiting yourself on social media, putting limits on things, waiting for 90 minutes, an hour, hopefully 2 hours before you check your phone in the morning as best as possible. Starting to mediate how much time you spend on screens. Starting to balance out, because like I said, if we're so hyper dopaminergic, we've got a lot of dopamine coming to us all day. We need to balance that out with the opposite end of the spectrum, which is looking down, the here and now. How do we balance that out with serotonin? How do we balance that out with gratitude? So the dopamine is the molecule of more. It's pushing us forward into motivation. But once we get there, it's like we've been aiming towards this big goal for such a long time. And once we get there, I mean, yeah, okay, that was fun, but what's next? We don't get the reward that we think we're going to get. So we need to train the other neurotransmitters like serotonin and sit there and say, hey, look at how far I've come. Look at what I have achieved. Look at how much better I am right now. And look at how that's affected my family. And I can be so grateful for all these things, which is going to spike serotonin. So keeping a gratitude diary, journaling, and being present, using breath work, especially parasympathetic breath work or down regulatory breath work, where we're exhaling longer than inhaling. Remember, dopamine is part of the cycle that feeds norepinephrine in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a stress hormone. Okay, that motivation is the same as stress.
Mm.
So as part of the process, we need to have certain amino acids from protein, phenylalanine, and that gets converted into L-tyrosine. L-tyrosine gets converted into L-dopa. L-dopa goes to dopamine, and then dopamine gets converted into norepinephrine. So anytime we're experiencing stress, there's an influx of dopamine as well, because that's going to help with our motivation to move and change. We can think of pain in a very similar way. It's a motivation to change, so that dopamine is going to be involved. But we also have to have the capacity to evacuate the influx of dopamine as well, which comes to the nutritional aspect. Okay, so do we have enough of the stuff to create the dopamine that we need?
Mm-hmm.
And then do we have enough of the stuff to evacuate the dopamine that we've used? That would be things like vitamin B6.
Yeah.
Super, super important in the enzymatic processes that create dopamine. And there have been a bunch of studies that come out. Obviously, we can talk about ADHD, but there have been a bunch of studies that have confirmed that the majority of people with ADHD and low dopaminergic conditions similar to ADHD have a deficiency of vitamin B6, especially the active form. Now, when we eat vitamin B6, we also need to be able to convert that into the active form, P5P. So we need to make sure that the methylation process in the liver is effective too.
Mm-hmm.
So things like bitter vegetables will help with bile, and there's different vitamins that help with methylation as well. So we need enough vitamin B6. We need enough protein. L-phenylalanine and L-tyrosine are both amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
Amino acids are just the building blocks of protein. So we need to make sure that we've got consistent amounts of protein throughout the day so that we can create enough of the dopamine that we need. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, when we're evacuating things, we need a gene or an enzyme called COMT, catechol-methyltransferase. And that requires, pretty sure, vitamin B3. You can check me on that, but it also requires magnesium.
I was just going to say it's definitely magnesium because I'm deficient in COMT.
So in the same way that, like I said, COMT evacuates and helps degrade stress hormones, norepinephrine and dopamine. but it also degrades estrogens in the brain. So the reason why you might crave chocolate
Mm-hmm.
or crave dopamine
Mm-hmm.
around menstruation, that time of the month,
Mm-hmm.
is because that COMT is occupied with taking the estrogen out, so it leaves the stress hormones in, and you're overthinking,
Mm-hmm.
leading to some symptoms of PMS. So
Mm-hmm.
now we need to start to understand the cycles that we all go through, and guys go through it too. Our cycles just a lot faster. We get things done in 24 hours. But understanding the cycles of the brain so that we give ourselves enough of the substrates that we need for these neurochemical processes. So things like vitamin B, all the different vitamin Bs, magnesium, selenium, all these sorts of things need to be part of an adequate diet. And if we're missing any part of a well-balanced diet and the essential minerals and vitamins that we need, well, then we may run into the symptoms of deficiency.
So in terms of the symptoms, like without people knowing, oh, so I know that I'm COMT deficient. I know that I've got the the APOE genes because I know that. But without people knowing that, so they present symptomatically in a way. I know I present that way, but I also do things and take things to help me regulate my dopamine uptake and release, like you've talked about. And one of those things is B vitamins, and another is magnesium. They're very, very important. So what I don't do is I don't metabolize oxidants very well. And I don't, I might get the dopamine rush, but I can't release it. Hence why people often say to me, my gosh, you're so driven. My goodness, you get so much done. But that's because I'm constantly on this high dopamine track. I can't seem to, like you said, talking about the molecule of now, I can't seem to get into that nice serotonin relaxation state. And so how do you, like with your clients, do you basically do all the assessments of them in terms of looking at them, talking to them, you're spending time with them so you understand their personalities? Because we develop, as someone who struggles to metabolize dopamine and stress hormones, so cortisol, adrenaline, I struggle to metabolize those. So in my blood, they sit at a higher rate than, say, in inverted commas, the normal person. But I know the things that I need to do to help myself regulate those. And that generally comes from, for me, eating something healthy, first and foremost, moving my body and breathing. And honing in and kind of doing this kind of insular thing where I just focus on what's happening in the here and now. How do you do that? And what's a great way in terms of what would be the advice that you'd give to people? Because even I think in this day and age, people who don't necessarily have those issues genetically, I think are developing it. Like we talked about with ADHD, we're developing this, this whole other health disease paradigm that's happening in the world because we're just like these overstimulated computers, aren't we? These robots.
Absolutely. The label is a useful thing, but it's like any tool. It's a tool. It's not the solution. So we can go through fairly deep questionnaires to understand the symptoms that a person has and where that might be coming from. We need to start to talk about some really deep things because the ACEs score might contribute to symptoms of depression and ADHD, adverse childhood experiences.
Yep.
You might have things like mold exposure, for example. So mold will emit lipophilic microtoxins. So they are attracted to fatty compounds, things like vitamin D and essential fatty acids. So that interrupts the metabolism of those compounds. So now the way to treat the depression or the ADHD or whatever label isn't an SSRI, it's to eradicate the mold, right? So we need to start to understand some of the root causation of these things. So we need to look at what's happening in a person's blood at the time and how do all these experiences over the lifetime contribute to that picture of health now? We could even be talking about historical transgenerational trauma, because we
Mm,
know that, especially when we look at the last 150 years, humanity hasn't had a great time. Let's be honest.
no.
We've got the Great Depression, World War II, World War One, Vietnam War. It affected most people in Australia and Western society in general, especially, and of course across the world. We've got certain famines, certain disasters, all the way back past the Napoleonic Wars. But what we know is that trauma can impact the microRNA of a person, which is going to be transferred down the line through either sperm or ovum, and impact the child and the offspring's capacity to release cortisol and deal with stress effectively. So it might not be something that you've done. It might be
Mm,
something that your grandfather happened to go through, and that's passed down the chain.
mm.
So we need to start to understand your experience, how that's showing up for you. Are there any deficiencies around that we can start to look at? Or I should say, is this a way of just an entry point of recalibrating your lifestyle and these rituals and behaviors that you take part in every day and building up over time? Because it's a habit, it needs to be built and needs to be learned.
Mm,
I'm not going to take somebody and expect them to achieve a handstand on day one.
mm, mm,
We
mm.
need to build the skills and capacity to achieve those movements in the same way that we need to build the skills and capacity to achieve the lifestyle changes that we want to achieve. So, like anything, learning to breathe, learning to walk, it's a process of relearning with motivation, with compassion, self compassion, especially, and with this drive that life can be better and I can do this.
Mm,
So,
mm,
helping people understand that there are certain ways where we can start to insert practices into our life. It might be the breath work, it
mm,
might be
mm.
going for walks barefoot, it might be grounding, it might be switching off the Wi-Fi at night. EMFs are a massive other conversation that we can have.
Wow.
These things also impact us. So we're starting to understand how our life has become this way. That's actually affecting us right now, and what we can do about it. Gaining back control of the things that we can control.
Yeah, wow. That's all huge stuff, isn't it? So that's all. There is so much. And if we were to take away just a couple of things in terms of things that
Mm,
people can put into practice
mm,
today,
mm,
what would they be? Like in terms of diet, in terms of movement, in terms of mindset,
mm,
what would they be, apart from the fact that
mm,
they need to come and see you and have, and we'll put all of your details in terms of how to get in touch with you, how to work with you in the show notes and everything. And you operate from lots of different premises, plus you do online coaching.
mm,
And that's fantastic because we are connected, but it's also great to see you in person as well.
for sure.
So what few things would you say to people,
Mhm.
regardless of what their symptoms are, that they could do today to feel better in their bodies and better in the world?
First things first, awareness precedes change. So we need to become aware of our behaviors,
Mm-hmm,
everything. So we
mm-hmm,
start to track, okay? We start to write down everything that we're doing, everything that we're eating, drinking, taking in from the environment. How much time are we spending on screens? How much time am I spending moving? How much time am I spending barefoot on the ground? How much time have I spent connecting with the people that I care about? What am I taking into my body? What am I consuming? What's the content of the information that I'm consuming as well? Because this can all lead to clues about how I feel about myself and my beliefs, my behaviors, and my rituals that are contributing to my picture of health. So, awareness first. And I would just track for a week.
mm-hmm.
Write everything down for 3 days to a week, which will give us a really good picture as to what's happening for you. How
Yeah,
do you feel? Everything.
yeah,
And that might be bite-sized pieces as well, because we need to make it easy.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't expect you to keep a diary the entire day and forget about work.
Yeah.
Still need to live. But just taking a snapshot and say, I really noticed this today, or I was eating this. If you're eating the same thing every day, then you can start to take 1 or 2 days diary, and then that
Yeah.
will be fairly consistent. If
Yeah.
you have a variety of food, then we need to track that down as well and just start to understand where you're getting these things from.
Yeah.
That would be step 1. Step 2, like I said, what are we consuming? Am I having enough whole foods?
Mm,
Am I limiting the processed foods?
mm,
Now, I'm not going to demonize every processed food out there.
mm.
So, dietitians, just wait. But we need to start to understand what's actually in the foods that I'm consuming and in what amount as well. So, we know that, for a very brief example, especially in the functional nutrition industry, gluten has been absolutely demonized. And it's suggested that everyone goes gluten-free because everyone will be affected by gluten, which to a point is true. Gluten also helps with glucose regulation as well, to an extent. So what we need to understand is that 300-400 years ago, when they were making breads,
Yes.
these would be fermented organic sourdough breads.
Mm, mm.
These days, we're eating processed, bleached out Wonder White breads. Not to demonize Wonder White itself, but top of my mind. That
Yes.
some of these breads that are so processed and don't go through that fermentation phase have sometimes hundreds of times the amount of gluten in them.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the chemical itself that we're ingesting, it's the amount in which we're ingesting it. So we can start to look at, the standard American diet, which is the standard Australian diet as well, and the amount of salt in things. Salt is great for you, especially if you're active.
Mm,
If
mm,
you're having it in a lot of processed foods, then you've probably already got enough. We're
mm,
just starting to understand the amounts in which we're taking things, and are we prioritizing whole foods, non-processed foods as
mm,
best as possible?
mm.
Would be number 2. So track first, mainly whole foods second.
Mhm,
And then the third would be, how am I moving throughout the day?
mm.
Can I get some more movement? Can I get some more breathing, deep restorative breathing into my day? Somewhere where I might be sitting against a wall but not sitting on my butt, where I can depress the pelvic floor, where my diaphragm can work effectively. Maybe I'll be sitting in a squat position for those of you who can squat, but spending some time breathing deep into the belly, exhaling longer than you're inhaling, and just recalibrating and stimulating that parasympathetic side of our nervous system, which will bring us back into that rest and digest state, especially before eating a meal. Some deep breathing and some humming can work really well, because if you think back to our evolution, where we were eating mainly was around a campfire. We were squatting or sitting on logs with each other, and we might be communicating and maybe talking about our day while we share a meal.
Mm,
So when I take a bite and I chew, you're going to tell me about your day, and you're going to share whatever you need to share, so we're connecting, and you're stimulating your voice box, you're stimulating the ventral vagus nerve. So that's putting you in a parasympathetic state, signaling to your body that you're safe and stimulating digestive juices like stomach acid. Then when you take a bite, I would repeat the process and do the same thing. So I'm now stimulating digestive juices and connecting. So we're practicing this safety, we're closing our stress cycle, and we're digesting things effectively, which in today's day and age, we're just not doing.
No, because
So
we're watching Netflix and we're eating dinner in front of the TV and
we're smashing it in so we can go back to work, because I've got 17 emails that I need to get back to, and
yeah.
I've got
And I work from home now, so therefore my boss I can work pretty much 24/7.
Yeah. So awareness, whole foods as best as possible,
Yeah.
connect, and breathe
Yeah.
would be the 4 steps that I would take everybody through first. And if
Yeah.
you can do those things, we're going to address the top of the pyramid, which would be our sleep, stress, stomach acid, which would be
Yeah.
the entry point for most of my clients before we go deeper into some of the underlying things like digestive health and injury management and all that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I love it. And I love it all. Dan, that's amazing. And what's the best way for everyone to get in touch with you?
You can email me, hello@revamphealth.com.au. I'm on Instagram at functional executive. There is a website up. It is go.revamphealth.com.au/revitalize. I'll put all these up for you.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
what I'll also do is I'll send you a link to a YouTube video, which is just a quick 5-minute guided meditation, which will help you put yourself into that parasympathetic state, into that state of safety. So you can use that either before you eat or at the end of your day, just calm your nervous system down, and you can utilize that as much as you like.
I love that. That is awesome. Thank you so much. It's so funny because this morning I was running around doing all sorts of things and arranging meetings and phone calls, emails, And I know that I was like, high kind of thing. Dopamine was up, wasn't getting released. No serotonin happening there. And I honestly, while you've been talking, I've been zenning out, man. I've just been zenning and having the most fun. And my brain, I just feel so calm and relaxed. It's been awesome. I'm
ready for a nap.
Yeah, ready for a nap, but I've got a meeting in 10 minutes, so no. But that's okay. You don't need a nap. You can, it's all about peaks and troughs, isn't it? And that's what's amazing. Dan, you're amazing. I love you. I think you're incredible. And I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of everything you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on Difficult Conversations About Beauty, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the future, because those 4 tips are the future. And of course, we'll put all your details in the show notes and everyone can get in touch with you, but they can also do that guided meditation that you've talked about.
Thanks,
so
Anita.
thank you. And I will see you very soon. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, please share. Remember to give it 5 stars and write me a kind review. Remember, kindness always comes back to us. All discussed links will be in our show notes. And until next time, may you revel in your beautiful and unique faces, both today and always.